The Kira case is easily one of the hardest criminal cases to solve that stemmed from fiction, specifically Death Note. It involves the existence of a supernatural notebook that can kill any human, and all the user of the notebook has to do is remember their name and face in order to write down and seal their fate. Along with the notebook, the user gains access to a Shinigami that can be used to aid them in their plans, and even bestow the user with Shinigami eyes that can figure out anybody's true name and lifespan with a simple glance. All of these resources were at the fingertips of one genius man, Light Yagami. He used the notebook and the Shinigami in an attempt to create a new world free of crime, with his only adversary being L, the greatest detective in Death Note's verse, as well as the police. But honestly, the police in Death Note were incompetent and too trusting, which can't be helped as Light Yagami is so charismatic and psychologically ahead of others that he knows the right words and actions to do during the most intense moments that can brush off any suspicion that one may have of him. But with all that being said, solving the Kira case is really hard, and it's why L lost. L always knew that Light was Kira, but the matter of proving something that is so incomprehensible and beyond logic itself is very challenging, even for a great mind like L. So what if we replace L with other detectives in fictional media and just rank the detectives based off of who would be the most likely to solve the Kira case itself? But let's ask Nier how he would solve the Kira case. Nier, how would you solve the case if you were in L's position originally? He's smug. Typical. Answer it for real though. See, was that so hard? Yes, Nier originally beat Light, but what about adult Nier being the one to tackle the Kira case from the start? We've never seen adult Nier really go all out or actually put any effort into solving a case. All we have are hypothetical versions of Nier that might be the smartest of all of Death Note, but it doesn't have much to back behind it, minus a BBK statement, which would maybe apply to Whammy House people or geniuses. If you use Polybuzz to speak to Nier again and ask how smart his adult self is, he says,
"As an adult, I'm smarter than L. However, I tend to be more ruthless and cold, unlike him. It's not a matter of belief. I have proven it. L was brilliant, yes, but he was also naive and too trusting at times. I am more calculating and less inclined to underestimate my opponents. Firstly, I wouldn't take the case and leave L to it. He knew exactly what he was doing. And then I'd get bored and just do my own thing."
Wow, he believes that his adult self would be the top of the verse, since L is at least definitively raw IQ-wise smarter than Light. Go download Polybuzz. It's free to download in the link in the description. Use my code Avent to unlock the Premium Plus for Polybuzz, as you can see right here. The only example of feats we have from adult Nier was during the Kira story, which takes place 9 years after Death Note canonically ends in the manga. In that story, adult Nier is up against Kira, who uses the notebook for profit rather than to create a world free of criminals like Light did. But during this story, Nier wasn't actually trying to apprehend Kira, but rather he was impressed by how genius his planning and strategy was. Minoru, or Kira, used the information he learned about the previous Kira and made sure to implement them in his plans, which makes sense considering security has improved tremendously over the course of a decade, and so the plans and strategies that Light used wouldn't have worked in modern times. But this is fine, as Minoru goes on to state that Light would have just adapted and adjusted his plans to fit with current events. But getting back to adult Nier, how smart is he? Well, this might be a controversial take, but adult Nier in terms of raw intelligence should be at worst comparable to L by this time, but at best he should have surpassed him. Nier was 18 when he was introduced in part 2 of Death Note, despite his youthful look, and there are numerous statements and guidebooks that place Nier as a rival to L on an intellectual scale. But you shouldn't confuse intelligence or IQ with who is a better detective, as after all, having a high IQ is only one piece of the puzzle. What made L such a great detective wasn't just his intellect, but on his own. He had the traits that both Nier and Mello possessed. L had the brain of a supercomputer, but also knew when to stay back and patiently watch from the sidelines. But he also knew how to be aggressive in his approach on a case, and knew when to act and take initiative. By part 2 of Death Note, the Kira case was probably Nier's first biggest case, and despite being inexperienced, he was still able to actually succeed, albeit he had access to large amounts of information at the start. You also need to remember that a post-time skip Nier would have had over a decade to grow and mature, with his brain being fully developed, which is significant as in Death Note, as L got older his intelligence and ability increased, as I told you before. L was 25 years old when he died, and Nier is currently 28. However, I will still say that the guidebooks that put Light and Nier's intelligence above L's shouldn't be taken at face value. When properly translated, the intelligence stat actually refers to knowledge, so in terms of knowledge, Light and Nier are above L, which would actually make sense. L isn't as obsessive when it comes to overall knowledge, but would rather obsess over specific case details. He doesn't spend his time reading pages and pages of books in different subjects, whereas Light and Nier would actually do that. Light would have probably spent a majority of his student life lacking knowledge due to utter boredom, and Whammy's house has a giant library for all the students to use, and we know that Nier was the top student who spent a lot of time in the library. So how would an adult Nier do against the Kira case? He doesn't have access to any information at all and has to start from scratch like L did. Would he be able to solve it? Well, it depends. Before I answer, please subscribe. Goal is 50k, so if you enjoyed this video so far, subscribe. What made the Kira case so difficult to solve wasn't just the complexity of the notebook and the existence of Shinigami, but Light is really cracked in terms of creativity and intellect. He's well versed in many different subjects and just has so many complementary skills that aid him in his usage of the notebook. With architecture, he can build false bottoms in drawers and hide them in plain sight. With chemistry, he can manipulate the false bottom of his bedroom drawer in such a way to where it's open the wrong way, it'll set on fire. With knowledge on computer science, he's able to hack, and quite possibly the craziest skill of all, Light's knowledge on stocks, which he uses to figure out the location of the notebook despite losing his memory and having to start from square one in the Yotsuba arc. Focusing a bit more on the false bottom in his drawer, he created it in such a way to where the only way to retrieve the Death Note was using a pen that pushes the false bottom up. If someone attempted to force open the false bottom, the circuit would connect and ignite the gasoline contained in a thin plastic casing and immediately set everything on fire. It would destroy all evidence of the Death Note existing and give Light an opportunity to evade capture. If Nier ever apprehended Light and questioned him on what he was hiding in his false bottom, Light could simply plead his innocence by saying he was hiding his real notebook and had a failsafe in order to destroy it and ensure nobody other than himself could read it. Although setting fire to your desk over a notebook is borderline suspicious, but what could Nier do? The evidence would be destroyed and he wouldn't be able to arrest Light. At best, he'd give him a slap on the wrist for starting a fire in his parents' bedroom, but not for killing hundreds of thousands of people with the notebook. There's also the complexity of the murders themselves, as Light can kill with the notebook via different methods other than just writing a name and waiting 40 seconds. But not all hope is lost for Nier. He would have a large amount of influence with investigative agencies, which would allow him to have a lot more political pull and not have to operate on his own like L did. Though Light could do what he did to L and make it so that the police distrust Nier and vice versa, you also need to remember that assuming the detective in question replaces L specifically during Death Note's timeline, they only have a limited amount of time. The closer that Nier gets to Light and the more aggressive tactics he chooses, the further away he pushes Light away from himself, and would especially lead Light to enact his memory loss plan, which was done as soon as Misa is arrested. Now, at this point, Nier would honestly be screwed. The memory loss plan was so elaborate that even L was stumped and had no choice but to let Light go, which led to good Light teaming up with L to find the Death Note, which she would touch, regain his abilities, kill the previous owner, and eventually plot out the last few steps in his plan to kill L, who would be replaced by Nier in this scenario. Even though adult Nier should be comparable to L in raw intelligence, he would still lack L's intuition and psychoanalysis, which is what led him to believe that Light was not only Kira, but knew that something was off concerning Light, and even led him to secretly believe that the power of Kira could be passed on to others. But this is also a problem. Adult Nier's win con is to prove the existence of the Shinigami in the notebook, as well as prove that Light is Kira. But if he can't do that if Light uses the memory loss plan, it's possible that the memory loss plan would just stump Nier so badly that he'd have to take a seat back, which would give good Light the necessary amount of time to find the notebook again and kill Nier, assuming he's working closely with him, which would be Nier's only option if he wanted to convict Light. So, for your information, if Nier is able to prove that Light is Kira early on, then all he'd have to focus on is securing the notebook from Light's room, which he could then bring to the police. However, if Nier takes too long, Light activates the memory loss plan, and from there it's wraps. So, from here on out, we are going to other detectives in media, starting with Detective Conan, and I use Nier's section as a way to bring about the conditions of this battle really, and explain Death Note's methodology with the Kira case. Detective Conan, whose real name is Shinichi Kudo, he gets chemically transformed into a child, with the series following his journey as a detective to uncover the mysterious organization that turned him into said child. Now, there are a few factors regarding Conan that could favor Light. Conan doesn't believe in magic or the supernatural, as all of his deductions are grounded in reality, so he wouldn't try to deduce the existence of Shinigami like L. But in Light's defense, this is assuming that Conan would have been able to deduce that the Kira killings are even happening in Japan. But if you believe Conan is able to do that, then by the time that Misa appears, it would probably be game over for Conan. He could use her in order to get closer to Light, but he can't be too aggressive in his approach, as if he is, this leads to Light enacting the memory loss plan, which complicates a lot of things. So you can see a natural theme here. If Light gets that memory loss plan, a lot of these detectives are kind of getting cooked. Overall, Conan could absolutely nail the Kira case as long as he works fast and is able to get over his limiting belief of the supernatural. And if he's in L's position, it does become easier for him. Conan is also pretty bad at keeping his identity a secret, which Light could possibly deduce with just a single meeting. That, and Conan is very aggressive in his approach of criminals and would often directly confront them, which Light could use to his advantage depending on the point in time in which Conan confronts him. If it's early on, Conan could have a chance to live, as we know Conan isn't his actual real name, but if Light is able to predict Conan approaching him, he could get Misa to position herself at a certain angle and figure out Conan's real name with the Shinigami eyes, which would be checkmate for Conan. Conan also doesn't have access to as many resources as L or Nier have at their disposal, as the entire reason that L was able to narrow down the suspects was gaining access to Japanese broadcasting and using the Lind-L Taylor Strat. However, not all hope is lost for Conan. Light's biggest flaw is his ego. He's a narcissist who believes himself to be the best, which is what causes him to underestimate all his opponents, especially Nier and Mello. Light would most likely underestimate Conan due to being a literal child, and although Conan doesn't believe in the supernatural, if he actually took time to gather information on the Kira case and look at the files, he would have no choice but to believe in the supernatural. Using his natural sense of knowing and feeling when people are lying, combined with a tendency to check and recheck information, Conan would have most likely suspected Light by the time of the Naomi Misora incident. Patrick Jane from The Mentalist. This is our first live-action character. This consultant has a wide array of skills under his arsenal. He's able to smell different forms of aromas and deduce complex emotions from their components. He always offers suspects beverage choices to get insight on their body language and taste, which reveals a lot about their deep psyche. He can perfectly read lips and can even know what a person is typing just from the movement of their pen. Furthermore, he can detect the most nuanced of micro-expressions, even when dealing with multiple people at once. He has wide knowledge on multiple topics in pop culture, like having memorized popular literature books, as well as key skills in detective areas such as knowing the most used PIN numbers. Jane is able to provoke criminals extremely well based on his understanding of their psychology, like when he was able to effortlessly provoke Wainwright, pressing exactly on the right buttons and attacking his relationship with his parent despite not having known him much yet. In the same area, his skills of detecting lies and acting are just unrealistic. When confronting Tommy Olds, a man who seemingly has autism, Jane was able to notice irregularities in his behavior purely from his emotional perception, even cornering Tommy when they were investigating him by forcing him to slip up about his knowledge on a rather advanced literature book. He's able to utilize all forms of mentalism tricks, manipulation, and even hypnosis. Jane is also able to detect hypnosis within others, as well as many forms of change in someone's psyche. This allows him to adapt to even supernatural concepts, like how Christina Fry believed she was dead, and in the afterlife, due to Red John's manipulation, inducing Cotard syndrome into her mind. Even in the face of such unorthodox situations, Jane is able to find the logical process behind and conclude the best tactics for his goals. Above all these skills, Jane possesses high cognitive capabilities and exceptionally high reasoning as well. He can even deduce personal information on suspects with even things as basic as their home decor. He's also a quick thinker. He was able to watch multiple monitors for a horse race and predict the exact amount of outcomes that are likely in order to bet on the likely winning horses, make an overall profit, and deceive Barnes and his companion into thinking he had the ability to read horses. Another instance of Jane's quick thinking and high cognitive proficiency is when he was able to learn law by himself in less than a day and become his own lawyer in a court case. He learned golf in a few minutes and taught it to a mafia leader, and he was able to perform blood spatter analysis better than professionals. Needless to say, Patrick has every quality any detective would need, and even more to go on. Solving the Kira case would be another Tuesday for him, especially since his lack of ego or dismissal of human life will allow him to avoid the mistakes Lawley had made in canon. And yes, Jane would be able to see through this supernatural object because he's tackled things like this before, even if it is more psychological than actual supernatural, he can actually still intuitively get there like L did. He has the ability to do so. Now, of course, Patrick Jane's real name is at stake here. He could die if his name is revealed, if he's doing his normal investigative with the CBI, for example, but if he's in L's position, he's fine, but this could be troubling for Patrick Jane. So, just to let you guys know, in just on-screen feats in a series, Patrick Jane is super stacked, and I have no doubt he can solve the Kira case, but there's an issue with regarding his secrecy and anonymity. So, that is an issue, but I'll be making a video on this soon where we put him in L's position so you guys can see how he goes. Next up is Hotaro Oriki. He's not solving it, but he's not a detective. Then what is this? Unless you include Oriki's hidden feats in the novels that are unreleased that I have access to. Volume 20 Oriki has a chance, but, anyways, that was all jokes, but there's no such thing as that, and he doesn't even get close to Light Yagami, though I love Hyoka. Another character that is not solving Jackal is Tsukasa Kaido from Tomodachi Game. He's just not getting it. Next up is Colombo. Nobody really even knows his first name, so that's one thing. Colombo has extraordinary feats. There's such a long list to go over. In the Bye Bye Sky high IQ murder case, Colombo unraveled an elaborate murder plot by a certified genius, piecing it together from tiny details like suit on an umbrella and the use of a rigged record player. In any old port in a storm, he cracked the case by noticing the temperature of a wine bottle, a small, seemingly insignificant detail that only someone truly paying attention would catch. What makes Colombo brilliant isn't flashy displays of intelligence, it's his persistence, his unassuming nature, and his ability to catch the things that everyone misses. That's where his genius really shines. Colombo would be able to solve the Kira case through seeing through ego-driven personas, piece together patterns from chaos and different orders, balance intuition and logic, and exploit psychological weaknesses. This would allow him to chip away at Light's defenses, one detail at a time. Where others rely on grand intellectual battles, Colombo uses persistence, humility, and an unrelating focus on human nature. Colombo is honestly insane when it comes to something like the Kira case if you really think about it, considering no one really knows his first name. Next up we have Rampo from Bungo Stray Dogs, a series which uses actual authors and places them as characters within the anime and manga. Rampo is a character who's unique in the sense that he doesn't actually have an ability. An ability is what the name suggests, a unique power that only a certain number of people have access to in Bungo Stray Dogs, and these abilities are usually based off of novels that the author wrote. Rampo, however, is different. He doesn't have an actual ability, his power is just him being insanely intelligent. Though he does like to play around and act as if he does have an ability, which he calls super deduction. With super deduction, Rampo is able to deduce and extract the truth behind any crime, and does this by taking in all the information of said crime and practically regurgitating it, in such a way to where he can look over a crime scene once and figure out everything. As such, this skill is invaluable and highly unmatched in solving crime areas, allowing him to figure out where to find evidence and who the culprit is within a matter of seconds. Rampo is so intelligent that even Dazai, a fan favorite and character who's seen as the poster boy of Bungo Stray Dogs in terms of the smartest character, has stated numerous times that he's inferior to Rampo. In L's position, he just solves the Kira case and moves on. With brainwashing, he can do it easily, and it's even debatable as whether or not it would only take a couple episodes or arcs for Rampo to solve the case. The only reason why it would take longer for Rampo is that he'd have to start from scratch, as he's usually used to being called in and given a crime scene to work with. Rampo is able to figure out crimes with the most abstract context, such as when he first met Edgar Allan Poe, and with absolutely no proof, was able to figure out that the house they were in wasn't real and was created via Poe's ability. I'd say that by the time the cameras are installed, Rampo would know for sure that it's Light. All he'd have to do is break into Light's room during a time when nobody is home. Before he'd enter the room, he would just look at Light's drawer and would be able to safely retrieve the Death Note, and by touching it he'd be aware of Ryuk's existence, and he could just read the notebook and figure out its mechanics with a snap of his finger, and all he'd have to do is have Light arrested, which would be so simple. Rampo is so cracked at solving cases that he would be able to come out on top against an ability user whose ability was able to wipe away all evidence of a crime. but if he doesn't have L's position, he could be cooked. Now, I don't think I need to give an introduction to Sherlock Holmes, who's probably the most famous and greatest detective in fiction alone. Sherlock is very different from the other detectives on this list, including L in the sense that he likes to solve cases using clues and information, whereas L likes to set traps to shortlist and confirm his suspicions, even if he's not around. Sherlock works on the science of deduction. He likes to examine the scene of the crime and make serious observations, which is far beyond what a simple human could do. But his way of relating to these observations to likely events that happened or may be happening right now is what helps him find the killer, in case of murders, which is his prime task. He looks at a person, judges his appearance, style, clothing, the change of expressions on their face, and tells them where they have been to or where they come from. Which is why I don't think I need to go on a long tangent as to why Sherlock Holmes could figure out Light is Kira, whether we use the novel versions of Sherlock or the BBC version, but proving that Light is Kira is an entirely different ordeal, especially when you understand how complex the notebook is. With the power of the Death Note, you can kill any victim anywhere from a week or even 23 days in advance, even when paired with the fact that they can die via heart attack, suicide, or any other method of murder you can think of. It becomes tricky to narrow down a suspect. If Light had never fell for the Lindell Taylor Strat, L would have had to narrow down his suspects from 43 million people, and the same would be said for Sherlock. The murders in the Kira case are so complex that they don't leave a paper trail, as usually in a crime scene there's evidence that can be found which can lead to one finding the killer. Except again, the Death Note is a supernatural object. However, I don't believe any of this would stop Sherlock. While yes, it would be difficult for Sherlock to solve the Kira case as he has no apparatus by which to narrow the field in which the killings are taking place in, if Sherlock is able to put his pride to the side and appeal to the fact that the Kira case involves supernatural means, he would be able to solve the crime. The only big obstacle for Sherlock would be locating where Kira is and narrowing down the suspects, but from the second he meets Light and has a conversation with him, it's already over. He will know that Light is Kira, and actually proving that he is Kira will be pretty simple. All he has to do is find Light's address, and the same as other detectives, go grab the notebook and clean up the place in such a way to where it seems as though nobody broke in, which Sherlock is able to do, and from there it's wraps for Light Yagami. Unfortunately, this is where it gets too simple. Batman, like Sherlock, is also one of the greatest detectives out there. He has no powers and simply uses his resources, intellect, and vast array of skills to solve crime and keep Gotham safe. So how would he do if he was put to the test to solve the Kira case? Well, one thing I need you to understand is that unlike the other characters on this list, Light would not be aware of Batman trying to investigate him. Batman is not L, he is far different from L, and far more calculated in his approach. While yes, Batman can be considered egotistical to the rawest of definition, as well as overconfident in his ability to believing he is always right, he is not as prideful and cocky as L is, who outright taunted Kira in front of the world, and even went as far as to reveal his own identity to Light, despite having a high suspicion of him being Kira. Batman would do none of these things. He'd spend most of the case just doing his investigations without drawing attention to himself, which makes it hard for Light to really even figure out that someone is after him. There's also the fact that Batman wouldn't be in a state of denial like the other detectives when he eventually has to determine whether or not he's dealing with the supernatural, because Batman has much better knowledge of magic than the others on this list do, and would subsequently have a much easier time figuring out how the Death Note works. Not to mention the fact that most comic versions of Batman are supernaturally intellectual compared to other verses like Death Note. Honestly, it would not take most versions of Batman long to track Kira's existence in Japan, whatever version of Batman you pick. And from there, he'd likely be able to narrow it down further by investigating Kira's actions and the information he clearly has access to. Even if you argue that Light would have an easier time figuring out Batman as Bruce Wayne, Light's own arrogance and ego would get the better of him. He'd have a hard time believing that some billionaire playboy is someone as intelligent and justice-driven as Batman. Light's arrogance tends to cause him to make dumb decisions that even we as the viewer call out, which is actually something that I do enjoy about Death Note. Despite there being a multitude of geniuses, the fact of the matter is they are human and prone to making human mistakes. But Batman is really built different. His intelligence is so beyond human comprehension, it's very hard to believe that he is just a human. By the time Light figures out Batman is after him, the investigation would probably be over for him, and Batman would be showing up to arrest him. The only versions of Batman that Light might have a chance against would be Christopher Nolan's Batman or Matt Reeves' Batman, with both iterations of the Dark Knight being more grounded and less experienced in dealing with magic. But overall, Batman solves the Killer case before breakfast, especially if it's any version of Batman from the comics which have insane feats.